What if I told you that there is a mathematical formula that kind of separates those brands that scale really quickly and those brands that just tick along nicely? Well, there is one. I wish I had found out about it 25 years ago. But today, the guest that we've got on the show, all the way from the United States of America, has studied this. He has written books on it. He has looked at all the brands in the States that have scaled, as he calls it, exponentially. We're going to unpick this maths for the first time, giving you the formula to make sure that your brand has the chance to scale like those enormous skate ramp brands. Dr. James Richardson, best-selling author and consultant to early-stage CPG brands all the way from the United States. Welcome to Brand Growth Heroes.
Thanks for having me, Fiona. Glad to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. The reason I wanted to get you in front of our community here is because I'm such a fan of your work and everyone really needs to hear it from you if they haven't already read your book, Riding the Ramp. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Talk to us about the maths, as we would say in the UK or Europe, behind scaling a CPG brand, because it isn't really what people imagine.
Yeah, I think the first piece of math that influenced my book was that, so the mental model behind the skate ramp is this idea that undercapitalized early stage CPG founders, and what I mean by that is people who are not high net worth individuals.
Yeah, people who don't have shed loads of money or who just can't go out there and spend loads of money without the risk, right?
Right. So they may have some net worth and have some capital, but they're not super rich. So that's the majority of them. They end up having to be very scrappy financially with how they launch their business. And that leads to a unit economic model, which would get you laughed out of a boardroom at a public firm. And that's because the public firm owns manufacturing facilities. So the minute they turn on the factory, symbolically speaking, their cost per unit is super freaking low. It's nowhere near what you're going to pay. Not even probably 10 to 15 times less. And it depends on the category. It can get really high. And so I was learning about this as I was researching the book. It's that structural disadvantage which creates a really dangerous unit economics. It's like riding a knife edge, essentially. You have to have a path to scale that will move fast enough that you can survive that and not too slow. In fact, I actually have written and talked elsewhere about, not in the book so much, but the danger of growing too slowly. That's the first piece of math, is this undercapitalized situation and a high cost of goods for your thing. Right? So that leads you to a premium price. Some people have heard about my book but haven't read it. They're like, well, why is he pushing premium? I'm like, I'm not pushing premium. You go try to order product from a co-man, you'll have a premium price, trust me. Unless you're super rich. And then you can fund a really low price by having a bleeding P&L and just keep backfilling it, right?
But is that not just called going out and getting investment?
Yes, right. But if you look at Kevin's Sous Vide Meat, this big brand that blew up during the pandemic here, I mean, that was founded by a high net worth guy in California. I mean, he's just super rich. Nobody knows who he is, but that doesn't matter. so that most of us in this world, and the people listening to this, they're going to go out at a premium price in retail because their costs are high to make the thing. So how do we make this thing actually grow? Because if you talk to an economist, like any microeconomist, PhD, and I know a few, they will tell you that premium doesn't scale in consumer markets, right? It doesn't scale as much as low price. And that's generally true, right? Like a Rolex, they sell a lot of Rolexes, but only from the standard of $20,000 watches. Timex is selling a lot. Apple is selling a lot more watches at $500. Because you're stuck with this premium price, now you have to build a brand around that economic reality, and you have to I call it in the book, command a premium, and make people not only ignore that premium, but actually think that maybe they should even pay more subconsciously. Now, that is a crazy, irrational, emotional state to get the consumer in. It is not the kind of emotional state that you see even with a loyal, Walker's chips eater. They're not that passionate about it. They're not resharing their eating occasion of Walker's chips. Now, they may go through a ton, but it doesn't matter. There's no passion. And that's what you get with a late-stage brand. What you have to do mathematically is you have to create a velocity growth curve on top of your mostly linear distribution growth.
And just for people who are learning right now, what do we mean by that exactly?
If distribution is growing, say you're doubling your store count, just crudely speaking, So you start at 400 stores, you double to 800 and 1,600. This is slower in the US than in England and the UK because you don't have a lot of chains. So in the UK, you tend to basically have these huge stair-step increases. Probably got into Waitrose, and then you're going to go into Sainsbury, and then probably last will be Tesco, and Tesco will seem like it's going to break you.
Do you know that's actually changing right now? Because Tesco's actually, people are going into Tesco really early on. So yeah, a little bit of change.
So it's a little more aggressive and frightening in the UK than it can be more gradual here in the United States because we just have more places to sell in. Say you're doubling the store count. The problem that you have is both mathematical, but it's also related to what I was just talking about, which is how passionate are your fans about your thing? How like cuckoo gonzo crazy are they? And I'm not talking about extroverted displays like on social media. I just mean they're talking it up in their social network any chance they get. This tends to happen in categories where there's some kind of a social display function, by the way. So beauty, cosmetics, beverages, snack food. These are things that go into the house, they come out, we hold them up, we offer them as gifts to friends at the office. It tends to happen a little less in categories like, counter wipes. It's really hard to talk that one up to a lot of different people. But in these categories where fan enthusiasm brings you kind of social cred, that's the magic that you have to tap into to create demand at the shelf that grows your velocity. Now, you were asking, what does velocity mean? You can define it many different ways. The crude way is the number of units you're moving out of every store every week.
What we would call rate of sale.
Right. And if you track that rate of sale over time in the same store set, which you should be able to do with distributor data or with the retailer data or scanner data, whatever you can get your hands on, you want to see that growing month over month over month over month. Now, is it going to be doubling every month? No. But as long as it's growing 6 to 10%, you're going to generate, just like compounding interest on an investment fund, you're going to generate an exponential logarithmic curve. That's what causes that ramp and that bend as you add distribution. If you can't add distribution, obviously getting that skate ramp to happen is still possible, but it means you have to actually accelerate your velocity gains even faster.
How do you accelerate your velocity gains? Because I'm yet to see very many brands where their velocity or their rate of sale changes much, from the first 6, 8, 12 weeks. My experience, usually if it launches at a case per store per week, that's where it stays, give or take a few promotions.
Correct. That's true in the US. The way the math works on velocity at the scanner, the data level, is you're going to have a velocity spike because most likely the retailer forced you into doing a launch promo. So that brings down the barrier and makes it much easier for people to flippantly buy you. So you're going to get this little spike. It varies in how long it lasts. It's not too long. Then it's going to collapse again to some baseline you were just referring to. It's that after the first 3-4 months in a store system, you can start to track your baseline velocity. And that's what you want to see inclined. So if your velocity is growing linearly, say 10% a month on average, and believe me, this does happen, on top of store count that's growing, you can see how this turns into an exponential bending curve. That's the math. How do you make velocity grow at that increment? You don't do it through promos. That I can tell you will never work. So the challenge with promotions is that it creates spikes in trial when you launch, and it creates spikes in volume sold by bringing people who otherwise had a price problem with what you're doing. In other words, the cheapos. They're less committed to what you're doing, though. It's very tempting, right? Because you'll have a lot of people in the CPG ecosystem telling you, well, you want that extra volume, right?
But you also want the extra trial, right? You want people, you want to persuade people to reduce the risk and let them try the product, right?
You want more trial, but in the early years financially, you actually want the right people to try.
Okay.
The people who would actually pay twice as much.
But what if you've only got 90 days or, 90 days to prove to your, say, Sainsbury's buyer that your rate of sale is high enough to keep it on the shelf?
This is where people need to prepare for launch so that they've built an awareness building machine that's relative to the geographies where those stores operate.
Okay.
So this is where shopper marketing and consumer marketing actually need to blur together in the early phase of the business, because you actually do want to focus on the trading radius of those stores you're launching in. You actually want to do activations and things as much energy as you can put into it. And I think Perfected is really good at this in the UK. Yeah, is really good at that.
Perfected, yeah. Yeah. That's because they did my program, James. They did my program right early on. I'm thrilled to introduce Brand Growth Hero's newest partner, Jolson. Jolson is a leading B Corp certified commercial law firm that specialises in guiding the founders of scaling CPG brands. With long-term relationships with clients like Little Moons, Trip, Eat Natural, Bear, Graze and Pulson, Jolson is also famous for advising the Innocent founders in their landmark sale to Coca-Cola. And believe it or not, they still work with the Innocent founders at Jam Jar Investments today. I'm especially impressed by how Jolson sets founders up for long-term success and by their commitment to championing female founders. Recently, I asked managing partner Paul Chappie, why does a scaling brand need a corporate lawyer?
So you definitely need someone that's going to have your back, that is going to be looking at those pitfalls that may be coming in the future, preferably someone that knows the industry, because having that context is really important when negotiating, be that commercial agreements or funding arrangements. And at the end of the day, you really need to have someone that you can trust and obviously can negotiate hard when they need to.
Huge thanks to Brand Growth Heroes podcast sponsors, Jolson. Now let's get back to the show.
You want to activate the shoppers who are just obviously, because of proximity, are at that store. That will, I guarantee you, that will get high baseline velocity. The reason that people get delisted, they in other words, you were alluding to the floor velocity, is that they're not really doing anything other than like some really lame Instagram organic posts. The problem is, if you misread my book, you will fantasize about a product that grows velocity by its inherent design. Kind Bar had that magic. Skinny Pop had that magic. There are brands that, for whatever reasons that I honestly have no clue, there's a massive amount of luck involved in that. There's a fantasy that it's going to happen. I'm telling you, on average, brands that ride the ramp and succeed did not have that kind of luck.
Okay.
So they have to go out and build awareness somehow. And that's how it happens. And the thing is, you've got to have the time, and you've got to have a team, Fiona, that's going to go do that. So I don't know if you found the same thing, as like you have people come to your mini MBA, but they're solo founders. I think what you're doing is great, by the way. I think it's great to have an in-person event because it unlocks. A lot of people are going to want that. They don't want to take my courses because it's too cold. But but the problem is that I wouldn't be able to run your workshop because I wouldn't be able to look at them in the face 8 to 10 times in a row when they're doing it by themselves, because this is a team sport. That's what I've learned.
I think that's the thing. I think one of the things, I suppose, why I draw so much on your work and also on Eddie and Christopher's work at Category Pirates is, I'm not the person with all the answers. I'm a geek about other people's answers, and that's why I love referring and giving the source to everyone I talk to. It's like, read Dr. James Richardson, read Riding the Ramp, listen to his podcast, subscribe to Category Pirates Substack. I do that all the time. I don't mind being the messenger because I love that people bit. I love being in a room and building relationships with people and connecting people to other experts. And it's a different kind of strength, right? So, okay, so back to this. So founders, they get a listing. They have to realize that if they want to scale fast, say, for example, I don't know, like Perfected, I think they're hitting on, tens and tens of millions this year in revenue, and they only launched 4 years ago. Same with Trip, CBD drinks in the UK. Okay, so back to this. So founders, they get a listing. And they have to realize that in order to be one of those brands like Perfected or like Trip Drinks or Chobani, when I joined Chobani between 2010 and 2013, they were already doing $1 billion worth of sales. And what I didn't realize back then was that in order to ride the ramp, as you call it, that there's this exponential curve. It's not about slow growth over time. You not only have to grow your distribution, but also drive growth in your base rate of sale. So let's get back to that. How do you drive the rate of sale? You're going to double down on super consumers, super geographies, right?
One way to think about it mathematically is that you don't have to do any of this extra work that we're describing, which honestly, nobody wants to do it. It's exhausting. You're so busy with operations. You don't want to do what I'm talking about. But the problem is most of you are going to have to do it if you want to be growing at the exponential rate that my book's model is describing. And when you go into the case studies, that's what you'll generally find. And that's what I found. The percentage of skate ramp brands that were like Skinny Pop, where they just sort of, the word of mouth and the product just created this explosion, is a tiny subset. And so banking on that is crazy, right? And here's the nice thing, though. If that's going to happen to you, you will know in the first 3 to 4 months.
Okay, what will you see?
It will just be explosive velocity. The buyer will probably call you out of the blue while you're busy packaging something up and say, oh my God, we need more, right? So you'll be in this awesome, PR perfection scenario where everything's exploding and now you just have to source and supply it. The math is going to come to you with that. It's the majority of people listening who have to, let me use the skate park analogy. There's dropping in off a massive vert wall so you can go up a ramp on the other side. That's what Skinny Pop essentially has, right? When you have a product design and market timing that is just unbelievably rare, it'll just happen through gravity. But most of you guys are going to have to start on on the bottom of the bowl, and you're going to have to kick really hard, kick to get up that thing. And that's what Perfected has done. That's what most skate ramp brands do. They go out and build awareness. That's what Dude Wipes does. Dude Wipes has an internal ad agency, omni-channel, right? So this is what it takes if you want to grow velocity constantly for years.
Rule number 1, don't expect it to happen by itself, because for most of us, or for 99% of us, it won't. You've got to make it happen. Rule number 2, you've got to activate in the radius of your best-selling stores where you will find your super consumer is most likely shopping, right?
Early on, you want to activate near the store. You want to think like a shopper marketer and a field marketer because you want to be influencing store sales. You can get into something that you know a lot about, which is national brand awareness building later when you have cash, resources, team. But in the beginning, this is literally about making your buyer happy. The key unlock, I think, for a lot of people is you have to do something out of the store. Because the whole ecosystem, especially in the US, the whole ecosystem is saying, oh, there's 17,000 little trade spending little manipulations that you need to do. And then everyone gets spun around and confused, and suddenly they're out of money. And they don't have anything. They have no time, no money, and they haven't thought about the fact that, oh, wait, if I'm going to activate outside of the store, I have to have a sampling budget. I have to find a way to find near free or free help. That's like a huge deal. And I think people don't go there in part because they feel like they're maxed out. And I understand that.
But I think they don't even realize it's necessary. I think they think the job is done once they get given the, say, 400 stores, 200 stores. It's like, okay, it's on the shelf. We've got a good bit of on-shelf standout. If they're really good founders, they'll be already looking at their pack and they'll be kind of sneaking into the store and before getting the listing and taking a photograph of it on the shelf with other packs, and they'll be saying, yeah, it's got great shelf standout.
I think you're right. The final piece of math, Fiona, I think to add in here is the math of brand awareness building, which I've actually studied a lot more since I wrote the first edition, and I have a lot more data about it. And if you think about those rare brands like Kind and Skinny Pop and Chobani with no marketing, no field marketing, nothing, no push, that just exploded off the shelf by appearing with a totally zero awareness trademark, and that's key. You're starting at zero. That means someone stumbles on your product, reads symbolism, and goes, oh yeah. And then they go, and they have it, they love it, and they probably tell a bunch of people, and they become a heavy user really quickly. That's a lot of rare things that have to happen for your velocities to explode without pushing people to trial. Does that make sense?
So you mentioned something really important. You said something about symbolism. So what was it that made people pick it off the shelf? Talk about this symbolism thing.
The stuff that blows up is the stuff that's actually not very innovative.
That's not very innovative.
No, Kind Bar, not very innovative. The most innovative thing that helped that business was that it was actually one of the only low sugar nutrition bars on the market that wasn't full of artificial ingredients. It was pretty much the only one in 2005.
Yeah, but that's pretty important.
It was at the time for its early adopter base because it also was kind of like a handbag. It was beautiful, right? And so it had sort of what I would call like handbag removal value, right? Compared to the highly commoditized process looking stuff. So there were things that were very simple about pack design and nutritional.
So status and high value health deliverables in terms of outcomes.
So it had a lot of high status symbols in there. And well, it wasn't like kale chips. Like, how do I make kale taste like a potato chip? God help you with that challenge. But anyway, so it's like, that's just what I call weird in my book.
Fermented kale juice, don't bother.
I'm sure it's really healthy.
Yeah.
You should probably put it in my smoothie. Skinny Pop was not innovative. It just wasn't. It was accidentally a hole in the grocery store. Someone else, some big company should have launched that.
Why do you think Chobani was successful?
Chobani had a creamy version of Greek yogurt that didn't have the problem Fayet has.
Which is?
Well, it has the texture of ice cream. And so it's weird to Americans, right? So Chobani had this texture that made sense, and it had high protein. So the protein amount was very quickly discovered by people. They discovered that it was filling too, so they could have a Chobani and just go to work. Right? They didn't have to have toast or do a bowl of cereal. Again, technically, Chobani was a pain in the butt to commercialize because it just was. But to the consumer, that wasn't it was just like a high-protein yogurt.
So tell me about this. You talk a lot in the book about product attribute benefit outcomes. Talk to me about that. What is the phrase you use?
Attribute outcome signal.
Attribute outcome signal. Okay. So when Chobani launched originally, they didn't talk about high protein, right? It just was.
But see, the people who look for new things at an ordinary supermarket, they're a really interesting group. And they can unlock these kinds of things. They can cause these movements to happen. They can cause brands to take off. So people turned this thing around and discovered it. But the thing with Chobani is that people became ultra heavy users really fast. Partly due to the category, right? They basically switched entirely from Yoplait to Chobani, or from something to something, right? So, and when you do that in yogurt, your buy rates, you're talking about a very large buy rate coming into that business's P&L. So this is why in the book I talk about in the early stage, in the first 10, 25 million heavy users are critical for the financial efficiency of the business. That's why you want to not just have any consumer, you want to have Gonzo fans because they will become heavy users, and you want to have a higher percentage of them than you will have later. And that's where I diverge a little bit from Byron Schreiber. I mean, he's right when you're a 9-figure brand, because I've seen it in the data. You're just going to keep, most of your new consumers will be fairly light repeaters. They're not going to be Gonzo people. In the early days when you're undercapitalized, that actually doesn't work financially.
Okay, so this is a really important rule that we're sharing with people. So if you're out there and you're a founder and you're scaling your brand, look for your heaviest users and find more people like them and get those heaviest users eating more, or your medium users and start translating them into heavy users.
That's who you want to spend your time using out of store, marketing, sampling, and activation to try to find more of those people. It's not going to be a perfect science. There's no magic technique or Svengali, whatever, Star Wars manipulation that you can engage in. But you can play around with that while you're sampling and activating. In other words, and this is why I tell people to do early fan research, because this isn't rocket science. You can usually figure out what that key attribute is and then just keep repeating it.
So early fan research, is that like calling up your super consumers on the telephone and talking to them?
I mean, it could just be qualitative. That's fine. I mean, usually the pattern will reveal itself. If it doesn't, then I hate to say it, if it doesn't, you probably have one of these weird innovations that's actually really complex. So.
That's okay. So if you're not hearing the same thing over and over from a similar group of people that are all having the same outcome from your product, and particularly from a particular feature or benefit of your product, then you probably need to maybe rethink, unless you're selling really well, that is, but rethink about where you're going to focus, because founders are often trying to do so many things, right? They say, oh, but I can have this much fiber and I can have this much protein, I can have this much so-and-so. Well, ask the question, are you over-speccing on features and benefits? Do you need all of that much of each of the benefits?
There is a growing need for innovation in food, especially that's resolving consumer trade-offs. And there's more and more of that stuff that's doing really well now. And that requires much more clever innovation than Kind Bar was. Dan Lebetsky was not engaged in a nutritional revolution. That was not his motive. He just wanted a very simple bar that didn't look like a piece of garbage that came out of a chemical factory. It was very much that natural organic sort of motive, purity. He wound up with something that was actually more mainstreamable than he realized, because he tapped into this outcome I call weight management, which is still a massive driver in the US. We're culturally gifted at weight gain.
Yeah, so talk to me about the GLP-1 phenomenon in the US. Is that changing the face of consumption habits, and are brands going to react to that, or are categories going to change? Do you think, just from your anthropological background, what's your thinking on that?
I do think we're going to have a sizable chunk on those drugs at any given time. So that's going to change the baseline volume per capita in some of these junk food categories. Absolutely. That's what I think the early research is showing.
So, James, you're about to release a second edition of your book?
Oh, it's already out. It's on Amazon, Audible. It's in the UK, all the formats. I think you can even get the hardcover through Amazon. Probably take you 2 weeks.
And is it still called?
Still called Ramping Your Brand. I added 3 new chapters. There's one on the importance of seed capital and how to think about it. A mental model for, raising more than you probably thought you should. I talk about the journey of the founder who wants to stay in control. It's easy to be the founder when it's 5 people and you're in the first $5 million, right? But as the business and team grows, now you have to professionally develop. So I talk about that journey. And I think the failure of that professional development or professional evolution is the number one reason why investors end up taking over brands, right? Because the founder can't make the transition or they can't hire someone. The business gets in a situation where it's easy for an investor to come in and basically take it. So I wanted to put that in to encourage people the best way to have a successful ramp-up experience and even exit for a lot more money, just like Mr. Lubetsky did, is to keep evolving yourself. That's your biggest weakness long-term, is that if you just stay an immature founder, this is going to blow up in your face.
I like that. But I think that the culture, certainly amongst early stage scaling founders in the UK, is definitely this piece about leadership and becoming a better leader. So I think we've got a lot of that here. You've told us where we can find the book. We're going to put a link in the notes with a discount, right?
Yeah, it is on sale. The paperback's going on sale right now for about £12 sterling. Don't quote me on that.
I highly recommend that everybody listening grabs a copy. I certainly will be grabbing one of the new editions. Dr. James Richardson, Ramping Your Brand, thank you so much for coming on the show.
And thanks for having me, Fiona.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Brand Growth Heroes. Thank you so much to Dr. James Richardson for coming on the show all the way from the United States. If you want to go deeper, grab your copy of Ramping Your Brand. We've got a link in the show notes with a special discount just for Brand Growth Heroes listeners. And as always, if you found this episode helpful, please do subscribe, follow, leave a review, and share it with a fellow founder who needs to hear this. Just like you guys, reviews mean all the difference to me and my business. And I really hope that we can all keep learning, keep building, and keep growing together. I'll see you in the next episode.